Hello, football family. Welcome into Huddle It Up Films. I have Jordan, Gabe with me back again. Today, we're going to take a quick trip through the roster, check on some position groups, just some expectations, some confidence levels going around. Guys, Jordan, I guess you go first since you're right there next to me. Can you please tell me a little bit about your guys' podcast and Gabe follow right back up on them?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having us on, Jason. We're always excited to join you here. Gabe and I have a podcast called The Situation Room where we're trying to check out games on a week-to-week basis, get a little bit more into the X and O's, trying to break down a little film, trying to put some segments up there so you can see what people are talking about. Hopefully, we'll get that all 22 back so we can keep it going. But trying to give people a little bit of insight of what we're watching for in the game beyond just kind of good plays versus bad plays, winning versus losing kind of stuff.
Yeah, we named it the Situation Room, kind of because it's a play on this is a CNN show or I'm not sure where it started, but that's like some political show. But anyway, we thought that there's like situations within a game where you have a play that could be a game-changing play, whether it's like a touchdown run, like a long Lamar run, or like maybe it's a third down completion, a fourth down conversion, something like that can really like change the tide of the game. And we thought that was something that's like an interesting way of looking at the game. And we break it down probably like 6 or 7 plays over the course of a game to kind of take an in-depth look at the context in which it happened, the personnel on the field. Do they use motion? Things like that. We really want to break it down from all different angles, and I think it's kind of a unique perspective that we bring. And we also just like to have good conversation about the play, about what's going on in the game. So it's a fun podcast, I think, and we're looking forward to another season where we can start breaking down this game film.
Yeah, and
Gabe's also not telling you the truth. He picked the title of The Situation Room because of his love of Jersey Shore.
Okay, that's the guy, this situation, right?
Yeah.
All right, man. One for Huddle It Up over here. But yeah, hey, to my viewers, the links will be down below. Highly suggested. Their chemistry is awesome too. You can tell they've been friends and working together for a while. So yeah, X's, O's. Just really in-depth and critical thinking type of shows. What I love about it, they really kind of examine things with an open mind, and it's not all purple glasses, but it's not all doom and gloom. It's a really good balance of just reality, being practical about our situation. But we have a good show. This is a good time of year. The Ravens just finished their second preseason game. We're heading into the critical third preseason game. Who really knows how we're going to handle this as far as playing time? Maybe every coach's situation is going to be different. Me personally, just to touch on, go off on a little tangent. If it was me, I'd rest this defense and play it like a fourth preseason game. I don't think you need to see Calais Campbell or Derek Wolfe out there, even Marlon Humphrey, the starting safeties. I mean, we know what these guys can do, but on offense, it's a completely different story. And I think each team has its own story right now. So what I wanted to do with the guys today, and this was Jordan's idea, I think it's a great idea, is to just go through the position groups, not spend too much time on any one group, but just talk about what's going on there. And of course, it all starts with the quarterbacks. The situation's kind of played itself out here with Trace McSorley being injured. But I guess I'm going to phrase it this way. I'm going to start with you, Gabe. If Lamar, say it's a COVID situation, say it's a sprained ankle, say it's any kind of injury, how many games can we win with Tyler Huntley? Pick a time frame and say if Lamar's out for X amount of time, Tyler Huntley can do this.
So I think when I'm looking at a backup quarterback, I'm thinking normally about like a 3 to 4 week stretch where if that starter has to go out, can he come in and kind of like keep the ball rolling a little bit? And I think Huntley's capable of doing that. I think we could go 500 over the course of 4 games with Huntley as the quarterback. I mean, something about strength of schedule and what teams you're playing is going to matter here. If you're playing really hard teams, you might be out of luck. But if you're going up against like the Bengals, something like that, I think you can win with Huntley at quarterback. And he provides a lot of those things that Lamar does, just in terms of his ability to, make plays with his feet, escape the pocket if there's some pressure. Obviously, he can scramble. He has a good arm. He's still a young quarterback. There's some areas for him to improve, but I think he does offer some upside in that backup position.
Yeah, go ahead, Jordan. You can follow up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot to like from Huntley. I think he's a mini version. He's a mini me of Lamar. He's not quite as good at processing, seeing the field. He's not quite as fast. He doesn't have some of the touch that Lamar seems to have and the angles he has in the ability to throw the ball. But Gabe is right. I mean, if you break down the Ravens schedule, the front end is actually pretty light. Obviously, we've got the Chiefs in week 2, but surrounding that, you've got the Raiders, the Lions, the Broncos, the Colts, the Chargers, the Bengals, the Vikings, the Dolphins, and the Bears to start off the year. I mean, the Vikings, the Colts, and the Chiefs are kind of the 3 teams that you might kind of star amongst that group, but the rest of those are all very, very winnable games to me with Huntley. I think if you get on the backside of that, that's when we get into a little bit of trouble, right? Because then you've got the Browns, Steelers, Browns, Packers kind of all squeezed together. You get a nice little break there with the Bengals, but then you've got the Rams and the Steelers to close out the year. So, overall, I'd say I'm pretty confident in the Ravens quarterback room. I think Huntley is as good as, any backup that you're going to see in the NFL at this point. And he fits, what I like about Huntley is he fits the system for the Ravens, which is something that I don't think McSorley did as well. I think he was maybe potentially a better overall quarterback, but in a different system. I think Huntley fits perfectly for what this team needs to do. I think they need to get him those reps. They need to get him in the quarterback room. They need to give him those opportunities. But I mean, look, if we're talking about the quarterback position with the Ravens, we're talking about Lamar Jackson, right? Guys, has the league caught up with him yet? What do you think? The last time people questioned Lamar, it was at the end of a Chargers game where they thought they figured him out because they had 7 safeties or 7 dime backs on the field. And they're like, oh, they've got DBs on the field. That's how you slow down Lamar. And what does Lamar do? He goes out and wins the unanimous MVP the following year. So let me tell you how they're going to figure him out. They're going to figure out how to read his name off the back of his jersey when he's scoring touchdowns this year.
I love it. And then, I don't get frustrated by it. I just kind of like makes me smile. It's kind of like if I'm the arm wrestling champion of the world and someone challenges me to an arm wrestling match at a party. Just like, all right, go ahead and talk your stuff because, I'm confident in my guy, in Lamar. And, he's going to play well and be a great quarterback in the league for a long time. The one point from Gabe that I wanted to reinforce is his escapability, Gabe. Like, to me, it's not about running the read option. It's that, our line has had leaks in it, consistently since the beginning of last year, at least, conservatively. Cost us a few playoff games. And when those breakdowns occur, Huntley did really impress me with his ability to just make something out of nothing, escape it, not take a big sack, see him throw the ball away a few times. So that in itself is extremely valuable. And it's funny, first time I've said this or posted on Twitter, but Trace actually reminds me of a mini Baker Mayfield. You saw like when things are going right, Trace delivers the ball on time. Of course, he doesn't have the arm strength of Baker, but accurate, nice touch. Like Trace is in command. He knows what he's doing. But you saw what happened when that line collapsed in that first game, man. He just kind of shrank in the pocket. So it's kind of funny, like people say that like Huntley is a mini Lamar, and I kind of drew the comparison of Trace being a mini Baker. In the Ravens offense, with this offensive line in the scheme they want to run, yes, Tyler Huntley, my confidence is high. I'm with Gabe. If we play 4 games on equal type of stretch, 2 home, 2 road, all different, mixes and matches of teams, I expect to go 500 in there. And I think Tyler and, frankly, the coaches can adjust to something like that, simplify the game plan a little bit. Running backs, another strength of this team. You can talk about it from a confidence level. I mean, obviously, J.K. and Gus have to be very, very confident in them. And then, hey, Tyson Williams showed out. It looks like the roster is tilting. The third running back's tilting in his direction. Nate McCrary, some nice quick cuts. I don't know if you guys saw it. Did cut-ups of both of those guys. Nate is sneaky quick and very patient. And then, of course, Justice Hill, stalwart on special teams. Still has some upside. May have some value for a team out there, although there are a plethora of running backs. So, Jordan, kick us off this time. Give me what you got on the running backs.
Yeah, I mean, confidence levels out the roof. I think the thing that stood out to me is how good Gus Edwards is. I mean, even the offensive line played better in the preseason week 2 game, but Gus Edwards is a load. And I love J.K. Dobbins, and I think he is legitimately good. And in terms of home run threat and talent and ability to catch the ball, I mean, he's going to be the primary back for this Ravens team for, I think, a long time. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised to see Gus Edwards having an equal number, if not more, carries than Dobbins when it all kind of runs out at the end of this year. He looked in fine form this past week in that preseason game, just busting through tackles, breaking through the line of scrimmage. And that first drive before Huntley Huntley threw that interception. He looked great. I think that you can't be anything but confident in these guys. And then, like you said, Jason, it's going to be a fun little roster game to see what DaCosta does with these guys in the 53 man. And with the IR kind of stash rule, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I think more guys are going to get left off rosters and not end up on other rosters, because everybody is kind of playing the same game where they're trying to get guys onto their initial 53 man so they can get them onto the IR. That's going to leave fewer spots for guys like Tyson. And I wonder if the Ravens roll the dice and see if they like McCrary and Tyson enough to, waive Hill or trade him and then try and sync both those guys to the practice squad so they get that extra roster spot, and then call up the one that's left or the one that they like if they need that roster spot when it comes around. It's going to be real interesting to see how DaCosta plays it, because the roster is going to be tight when we kick off the year this year.
It is. And Gabe, I'm sorry, I wanted to interrupt you. You guys can take off after each other, but I want to phrase this to you a little bit differently. How do you see the carries being split among, just say Lamar? We'll count Lamar in this too. Lamar, J.K. Gus. Who has the most? Do you see a 200 carry season for J.K.? Do you see it as more of a split, like Jordan was saying?
I think J.K. is going to lead the team in carries and probably in touches. It's hard to say for sure, with how good Gus is, especially kind of as a closer. I think, he's someone who can come in and just hammer you in the fourth quarter and pick up 8 yards a pop. And that's a skill set that he's pretty unique with his size, with his power. I do think Edwards will lead the team. I'm going to say he's probably around 150 to 175 carries. I think Gus has been really consistent in his first 3 years in Baltimore. He's basically got the same stat line every single year. It's kind of remarkable, actually.
It is.
But he's gonna pop off 5 yards per carry. I think he's going to be right at 110, 120 carries. Could be a little bit more this year. Because I think he's someone you like more on like the short yardage conversion on the third downs. He's just he just is a machine on third and short. He's just going to get you that first down almost every single time. And he'll pop it off for like a 20 or 30 yarder too if he breaks out of the box. So, I'm a huge fan of Dobbins and Edwards. We've seen some of these running back room like ratings around the NFL, and I put them up there with any of the other teams around the league. Even up there with Cleveland. I've seen Green Bay being rated really highly, but I think these two guys are really phenomenal. And then just to touch on some of the third running back conversation, I think I've always liked Justice Hill. I think he has a unique skill set. He's an extremely explosive player. And we've seen it in small flashes here and there. And I'm going to hate to see him get waived or get traded and go to a team, and he's going to be the featured back, and he's going to just become somebody who's like a big time star. I can see that happening for him. I can also see him just not picking it up ever and just kind of having a end of the roster career. But his upside is still there, and I would hate to see that show up on another team. But I think with Williams especially, he's someone who you can see be effective in all three phases of the game. He's a good running back. He can catch the ball. He can pass protect.
Yeah.
He's kind of the complete package, and he has good size. He has this, kind of a unique pedigree, bouncing around in college a little bit before, coming as an undrafted. But I love the upside. I love the potential of having him on the roster for 4 seasons. I think he's someone who could really come in and be an effective starter kind of player if needed to be. And that I'm not sure about if Justice Hill could fill that role if asked to do it.
Yeah, there's something physical about Tyson's game that I love, and it just seems to fit in our offense. You talked about the quarterbacks earlier, but Williams, man, his pass protection just kind of stunned me. When I saw him stonewall and blitzing linebackers, I mean, that's something that Hill can't do, and it's not from lack of willpower. I mean, Justice Hill plays hard. That is something you can never question that man's effort. You see it on special teams. But Tyson, I mean, just 2 steps in stonewall and a blitzing linebacker. His hands, we've seen the hands of all the backs, and I was glad to see that is at least an option in the passing game where we're scheming, opening some short passes, mostly to Oliver last game, but also to the running backs. Glad to see that. This is the easy way. Justice Hill, I think that there's a good probability that if he is cut, a team's going to pick him up. And you know what? If that team's like the Rams, 49ers, maybe some other team that needs a little bit of a compliment, he's going to produce. I mean, the numbers are going to be there because of the system, and fans are going to go nuts. But I kind of like. I'm not as high on Justice Hill as a running back as Gabe is, but I think that he brings tremendous value to the team in special teams. Nate McCrary, perfect practice squad guy. I think that that's his likely destination, and I hope we're able to keep him there. I would actually kind of like to hide him just a little bit in this last game. It's going to be a tough balance of who to give the touches to, because you don't want anybody to get hurt. But so I expect McCrary to get some action, but let's hide him a little bit. And I guess that's about everybody in the group. Anybody have any thing else to throw in on the running backs?
I mean, with Justice Hill, my issue with him is lack of decisiveness, and just too much dancing. He's got great elusiveness, and he's always trying to use it, and he doesn't have the vision and the ability to make quick decisions in terms of what's in front of him from a vision perspective. So I don't know that he's going to succeed even in an offense like the Niners, because he doesn't know when to cut upfield, plant the foot in the ground and go and initiate that contact. He's always trying to break the long run constantly. You see it in the preseason games. I mean, if you look at what Tyson and Edwards did, they were much more successful behind the same offensive lines in these first couple preseason games. It's just, I just think he doesn't have the vision to be an NFL running back. Tyson reminds me of Alex Collins a lot. Actually, when I kind of saw him out there, I thought that it seemed to me like he's the kind of guy that the Ravens lock into. But that's the other thing about practice squad guys and running backs. I think that there's going to be a lot of consternation by Ravens fans if they lose one or both of these guys and end up keeping Hill. But, there was just as much consternation when we lost Smoke Mizzell, and it turned out that, there wasn't anything there either. So there are a lot of running backs out there. The Ravens will find another one if they lose these guys. We're talking about way down the roster. Like Gabe said, we've got so much talent in the top two guys here that hand wringing over what the third guy is going to be, I think, is something that we don't really have to worry about.
Agreed.
I'll just pivot real quick to the fullback position, because I don't know if we're going to spend much time on it. But
no, great. Thank you, Gabe.
I just want to say that Patrick Ricard is an animal. He's incredible. He's going to be a really important part of this offense, I think, especially with potentially some of the injuries to the tight end position. And then I'm just going to say I'm a little sad for Ben Mason because he's not going to make this team, but he's someone that might make the practice squad. I think he will, probably, because I don't think anybody else is going to pick him up. But it's unfortunate that you get drafted and then you don't make it. But it's just a roster kind of crunch situation. We can talk more about that later. But maybe in next year we'll see some more out of him.
Yeah, that's got to be the plan at this point, because we're crunching the roster already. And hey, we're covering a lot of ground. But I tell you what, man, we have a lot more ground to cover. I'm going to split the receivers up. Now, we could talk about we could have a whole episode on the receivers. But I want to just kick it to Gabe first. And I want you to talk about the top three receivers on our roster, being Bateman, Hollywood, and, of course, Sammy Watkins. Gabe, just give me your overall perspective. These guys all banged up. How do you play if they're able to play? Say they're cleared to play. Do you play these guys on Saturday, give them 15 snaps with the ones, or do you just have confidence in the practice time and roll them out when they're more than ready, not when they're ready?
I don't see any benefit for them playing. Honestly, it's preseason. There's plenty of reps that they're going to get in practice. The chemistry is going to be built there. It's not going to be built on 15 plays. I know there's something to be said against playing against a live opponent, but honestly, it's not worth the risk. And they're all kind of touch and go with the injuries. Bateman, he's running routes. Apparently, Marquise Brown has said it's been close. We're not really sure what's going on with Watkins, which is, I think, giving some fans a little bit of pause. But I'm hoping, we still have a couple weeks before week one rolls around, so there's some time to heal up. I think there's some time to get those reps in practice, and I think once we get to that point, those three guys will be, productive for the Ravens this season.
Yeah, and to follow up on Gabe, there's virtually no chance we're going to see Bateman or Watkins in this game. I mean, Bateman's may not be ready for the season. Hollywood Brown, a little bit different story. I mean, we've seen him working out pregame. He looks 100% to us, but maybe you give him 15 snaps. But that's a great point, Gabe. Like, he's played with Lamar for 2 full seasons, and they practice together all the time. What in the hell is 15 snaps going to do for their chemistry? I mean, they've been through the wars together in playoff games and all that other stuff. So yeah, I tend to agree with you. And then Gabe or Jordan, kick it to the back end of this, man. We have Tylan Wallace. Boykin is still in the picture, I would imagine, somewhere. I mean, it's hard to know where he fits into the Ravens' plans because we just haven't seen him on the field. And then, of course, you have Devin Duvernay, guy you would love to give touches to, and James Prochet, a curious case of him not being targeted. And I mean, you and I saw the same thing. We went back and forth on Twitter. They're not. It seemed like they saw enough of Prochet in these practices to where they weren't targeting him at all. He wasn't a read. He wasn't in the game plan versus Carolina.
Yeah, I don't I don't necessarily understand what the heck the Ravens are doing from a play calling perspective this preseason. I think that they've decided that they're not going to show anything at all in terms of what they've got in front of them in these preseason games, and they're just going to be content with that. Why show anything if the offensive line is in shambles, if you're not starting any of your starters? Let's keep it all quick. Let's keep it all underneath. Let's keep it all one read stuff so we're not giving anything away. Let's run plays that everybody knows we run that are already on film. And evaluate it that way. So it makes it impossible to kind of analyze what we're going to get from some of these guys on the back end, but you got to like the talent in it. Duvernay and Prochet both look the part so far in terms of what we're seeing in practices in the preseason. I think Boykin's the big question. I mean, I think the Ravens are either going to try and trade him or they're going to IR him to start the year, and they're just going to keep him. They're just going to keep him because they want to retain those rights. But there's no spot for him, and I don't think there are meaningful snaps that are going to be there for Boykin regardless this season. Because even if just like you were talking about the top three guys all being hurt, and then you've got another 2 guys or 3 guys right behind them that are threatening for spots. Where are the reps there? Where are the reps going to come from Miles Boykin? I don't see them there. And if he's not heavily enough to let him, start taking more of these inline snaps and practices and things, he's had no chance to kind of be able to run some of those interior routes, even if he's not blocking inline. Being able to run the routes from inline, kind of being that seam stretcher, those kind of things. He's not had the chance to do that. I think the injury is going to ultimately land him on the IR, and so the Ravens will retain his rights if they can't trade him, because there's kind of no reason to cut him outright. I think, especially if he's carrying an injury as we get to the end of where we are. But I mean, when I think about the Ravens wide receiving core, I think mostly, and I might be in the minority about this. I think it all comes down to Hollywood. Quietly, Hollywood has the most touchdowns of any wide receiver in the AFC North over the last 2 years. Most people wouldn't expect or know that. Lamar does have great chemistry with him. He had a really bad 4-stretch game in the middle of the season last year. We just had the yips and he couldn't catch the ball. But if you took his numbers on both other sides of that, he was going to have closer to 1,100, 1,200 yard season. He was going to have closer to 10 touchdowns instead of 8. He was going to put up a big year. He's got now the opportunity to have either a more spread out team or be the guy kind of taking the top off the offense as guys are coming down into the box. If the Ravens can take advantage of that, I think he's the true X factor in kind of us getting to the next level and unlocking him as that true, genuine deep threat. If the Ravens and Lamar can figure out how to do that, that's going to put this team into unstoppable territory, right? We don't need him to be Tyreek Hill, but if he can be 80% of what Tyreek Hill puts on the field, and Andrews can be 80% of what Kelsey gives you, I think the Ravens can be just as effective on offense when they need to be, just like the Chiefs.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a very complimentary group, especially like you brought Andrews into it, and that's a good way to transition to the tight ends. And I think I got an idea here how I want to talk about the tight ends. Now it seems to me that we have Andrews, obviously, and his backup at this point appears to be Josh Oliver. And then you have Nick Boyle. His backup appears to be, at this point, Eric Tomlinson, who had an awesome game versus the Panthers last week. I mean, his blocking was superb. He was the key block on McCrary's touchdown run. You could see him working up to the second level. I mean, at this point, I'm almost worried that Tomlinson would get claimed. The value of a tight end is something, a blocking tight end is questioned, but teams are going more to two tight end sets. The backs are eliminated. It's more about the wide receivers and the tight end. So whoever wants to rush in and talk about Andrews and Oliver, go ahead, situation room, situation it out.
I'll jump in here. I think that, I'm not going to say too much about Andrews because I think he's a commodity that we know at this point. He's going to probably lead the Ravens in targets this year. He's probably going to lead them in touchdowns. He might be him or Hollywood, but he's just kind of like the go-to target for Lamar. In those third down situations, there's areas where he can probably get a little bit better. There's some contested catches, some drops that he's had in big situations, I think, that stand out. But he's definitely, a extremely talented tight end, very reliable. I think last year he kind of came into his own as a blocker too. He's always been known as more of a pass catcher, but he's a really well-rounded tight end. I don't think he gets enough credit for being a solid blocker as he actually is. And Josh Oliver, he's had a chance to shine in this preseason. He's been the guy we talked about in the week 2 game. He was pretty much the number one target in all those underneath plays to kind of keep the chains moving against the Panthers. I thought he did a good job. He had that one fumble, which was unfortunate, but overall, he looked like he was, pretty clean in his routes, good hands. I think that he's someone who isn't going to be like an exceptional explosive down the field threat, but, he can be that third guy who comes in kind of in that Hayden Hurst role that we had 2 years ago where, he might not get a lot of targets, but if he's going to be targeted, it might be in a big situation. And he has, that skill set to come through when you need him to.
Yeah, that's what excites me about having Josh Oliver on the team is the 3 tight end sets, because now you legitimately have 3 guys. Now, Oliver is not the blocker of the other 2. Like you said, Mark Andrews has really come a long way in his blocking since he's got here. I mean, props to him. People concentrate on their receiving and the things that get them paid, but Mark Andrews has bought in and turned into a really good blocker last year, I thought. But those 3 tight end sets that we saw Roman use to his advantage are back in play with Oliver on the roster, because now you can put 3 guys out there who can line up anywhere. Jordan, your thoughts on Boyle and Tomlinson?
Yeah, obviously Boyle's a real big question mark as to whether or not we're going to see him in week 1. I think ultimately we do. I think it's another one of those instances where the Ravens want to just keep him as healthy, give him time to recover as much as possible. He doesn't need time in this system. He doesn't need time, especially if there aren't any significant wrinkles in terms of what they do in the Raiders game. I think he's going to be fine. But, Tomlinson did look good. But, the other thing to remember is Tomlinson was on a practice squad until the middle of the year last year. And the Ravens claimed him off a different practice squad, and they only put him on their practice squad. He wasn't even on the active roster last year either. He was one of those guys that was kind of getting shuttled back and forth during the regular season off of the practice squad onto the 53. So I'm not, and I could be wrong on this, I don't think he actually held a spot on the 53-man roster at any point during the season. That as like a full-time role. So I'm not as concerned about the Ravens potentially losing kind of that down blocker guy. And I trust Acosta to be able to kind of utilize these practice squad spots to kind of rotate these guys in. And I think Patrick Ricard deserves a little bit of a mention here as being able to be an inline blocker if they need him to be. The Ravens showcased some pony last year where you had Edwards and Dobbins on the field together. If Tyson is as good as he has been, he could be the up back in kind of like those pony looks where he's kind of out in front blocking if they need him to, with Ricard on the field as well. So it leaves the Ravens some blocking options from the tight end perspective. So I anticipate Nick Boyle will be on the roster on the initial 53. We might lose him for the first 3 weeks, so that short-term IR, but I doubt it with the. And I mentioned this on Twitter, the Chiefs game is looming in week 2. And if the Ravens want a legitimate shot at the 1 seed and a legitimate shot at the bye, that has to be nearly the biggest game they have circled on their schedule. They have to win that game against the Chiefs. I believe it's at home. They have to win that game if they want to be the 1 seed. There's no question about that. And so I hope that they don't look past the Raiders, but I also anticipate there will be some decisions that we might be surprised by when it comes to week 1 with like guys like Bateman and Boyle who don't end up on that short-term IR that show up in that big week 2 game because it makes sense for them to be there.
Yeah, for some reason it would not surprise me if Nick Boyle just walked in the door one day quietly and all of a sudden is practicing and all of a sudden is playing. Like, I don't think it's to the Ravens' advantage to really tell anybody very, very much. And, just a couple of side notes. Number 1, best pony backfield I can ever recall is Marcus Allen and Bo Jackson. I don't think you're going to get any better than that. You had what? She doesn't agree with me. She doesn't agree with me. Let her bark it out.
She says it's LaRon McClain and Ray Rice.
All right. Yeah, I defer to her. I defer to her. She's not choosing Michael Vick, though. By the way, I imagine that at Jordan. Yeah, yeah, that's right. But my fault on that, guys. Hey, while Jordan's getting the bark over there, Gabe, what's the chances we are able to trade Jake Verity? I mean, we're kind of joking about it, but what are the actual? Give me a odds. Give me an over under on that one.
I mean, I'd say the odds are less than 25%. But he has looked really good, right? Like he looks like a veteran out there. And you look at around the league, and you see teams with guys who've been in the league for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and they're, you know, pushing kicks, hooking kicks, not able to make, easy should be like extra points. And he's knocking everything through, and he looks like Justin Tucker out there basically. It's right splitting the upright every single time, 50 plus yards, he's nailing them. So I don't know. You never know. I think it's unlikely, but I think he is going to be on somebody's roster, and he's going to be a good kicker in the NFL. I have no doubt.
Yeah, that I think it was a 40-some yarder from the left hash in the way, like I'm not a field goal expert, but I've seen enough kicks to know like the fade that he had on that thing and the angle was just like you said right through the uprights. Like it wasn't one of those like kick it as hard as you can and pray it stays straight like a golf shot. Like he had actually had a game plan for that kick. I mean, even with my untrained eyes, I could kind of assume that. But Jordan, yeah, kind of got overshadowed by the dog there. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, I think that the Ravens may have gotten burned from the
Vedvik?
the Vedvik trade last year, where teams don't want to be labeled kind of like the Vikings were last year, and so they might not be willing to. But Gabe is right. There are 4 or 5 teams that actually need a kicker. Not just kind of have a veteran that hasn't looked great, but like there are 4 or 5 teams that need a kicker. And so I think it's a little bit higher. I'd say it's closer to a 50% chance that he's traded for like a 7th, like a real late pick or maybe a conditional pick. But who knows? DaCosta, let him work his magic. I think we are going to see some trades after the last preseason game before that Tuesday cut down date, and not just from the Ravens. I think a lot of teams, they're going to be some musical chairs because of the way the roster systems are set up this year.
Yeah, it makes sense, and especially with a deep roster and with DaCosta being your GM, you would expect him to try to, he's trying to get every dollar counts. If he can get a 7th for somebody he's not going to keep, guess what? He's going to get the 7th. He's not going to worry about how that player performs elsewhere. This awesome segment on the offense there. I guess we covered it. Is there anything else anybody would want to say, or should we move on to the defense?
I mean, you just want to gloss right over the offensive line, huh, Jason?
Oh my goodness, I do. I actually do.
I do too.
Now, when I go back and rewatch this, I want to see the looks on your guys' faces as I was just glossed over the offensive line there. Guys, how the hell are we going to attack this? I'll just go ahead and Jordan, take this one away.
I mean, it's a whole lot of crossing your fingers and praying that everybody's healthy and that these guys can gel and that they're veterans and they can do it together. I mean, Zeitler and Villanueva have been doing this for a long time. They should be able to get it together. Stanley is a stud when he's healthy. Bozeman has played center before, so they should know how to do this. They need to make a decision. I think that they should start whoever they're going to start at left guard in this preseason game to give them, 2 or 3 series together and then hope nobody gets hurt and roll with it. I think there's some interesting decisions on the back end of the offensive line. I think we haven't seen it. No one has stood out in these preseason games. Ely a little bit. I think he might get a roster spot because he looked good enough at right tackle in the last preseason game as a surprise. But otherwise, I would not be surprised if Breedson, Cologne, Powers, whoever is the odd guy out, Makari, I'm not going to be surprised because none of them have done enough to earn kind of a swing role on the offensive line, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm more worried about the starting left guard position or the backup offensive tackle because I think they're both massive question marks right now for the Ravens. I guess you have to be a little bit more concerned about the starter. I think you have 4 guys who you might be able to plug in there, but none of them have really had the chance to kind of earn that role, which is why it's really scary. I think from a fan's perspective, at least. If I had to bet, I'm going to say it's going to be Powers to start the season. I know he looked awful in week 1. I thought he looked a lot better in week 2, but it's hard to put someone out there who hasn't been able to practice. And Tyree Phillips hasn't really been able to practice. Ben Cleveland hasn't really been able to practice. And when he was practicing at left guard, he had a lot of issues, I think, early on. So, he's someone who might be able to come in later in the season and take over. But right now, Powers has the most starting experience of anybody. And he's had some issues this offseason, this training camp, this preseason. I thought he was solid last year when he was playing at right guard. I think he can kind of be that guy who he works out for the first couple weeks, and then you kind of rotate in somebody behind him who you have a little bit more confidence in. And then, like I mentioned, offensive tackle, there's nobody on this roster who I'm comfortable in being the backup offensive tackle. I mean, is it going to be, like you said, Ely? I mean, he looked good in like a half against a depleted roster that was not really even trying anymore.
It was
I mean,
12 plays. It was 12 plays. He came in fresh and just kicked some guy's butt that is probably going to be bagging groceries. So you have to take it for what it's worth. But I'm sorry, Gabe. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like maybe Schofield has maybe a leg up there as someone with experience, like experience playing tackle. He's looked okay. He hasn't been like beaten like horribly like some of the guys have been, but I don't think Tyree Phillips is a backup tackle. I think I've said many times that he's a guard. It's a problematic situation, and I don't really have confidence in anybody to come in and play left tackle, or even right tackle for that matter. It's a concern.
Yeah.
What is up with? I feel like every year there's one position spot where DaCosta kind of says, "Oh, our depth is going to be good enough from what we have with these guys." Like 2 years ago it was the inside linebacker position. And it's just like we're seeing the same thing. I mean, we saw it on the offensive line last year. They did not have an answer for Marshall Yanda, and they didn't really attack it. They did. I mean, it's hard to say they didn't attack it this offseason, right? Bringing in Villanueva and bringing in Zeitler should, in theory, solve these problems. If I'm betting on Phillips to be the starter, I think he practiced more than you're letting on to, Gabe. He didn't play. He missed the one practice right before the Panthers preseason game, and he missed the preseason game. He was back after the next practice, so I think he's only missed one or two practices. So I think he can play guard, but yeah, I mean, confidence, no.
Yeah, confidence level over here is scarred. That's the word, because when I look at the list specifically, well, all three playoff losses that we've had the last 3 years, our last three exits, if you had to ask me, like, it's a team game. A little bit of blame goes on Lamar, a little bit of blame goes on the coaches, a little bit of blame goes here and there, but the offensive line has got to give you a fighting chance. And I mean, back in 2018, it was Ingram and Bosa crashing in, and 2019, Jeffrey Simmons. Then we get this playoff matchup with the Bills. Hey, they're not real big on the offensive line. We should be okay on the offensive line against the Bills, and then they destroy us up there. And then the snaps, and it's just like everything that could go wrong would go wrong. But I actually, on the left guard, I have to weigh in. Number one, I'm not as concerned as you guys, because I think with Stanley and Bozeman around them, I think that we can find one of those three guys to play. And then the second thing is with Powers, I haven't bought it from the start, the beginning of camp, that he would be the starting left guard, and it's because of his mobility and what Greg Roman asks out of that position. And I have to be brutally honest. There are things that Powers does well, but pulling is definitely not one of them. It's in the minus category for real.
Agreed.
It might be in the you can't ask him to do it category. I mean, you really get to appreciate Bradley Bozeman when you see others try to pull. So I think that the left guard battle will continue past this preseason game. Once Cleveland's practicing, once Phillips is practicing, I'm actually much more concerned about the swing tackle. And you mentioned Adrian Ely, and man, I really feel like there's, even though what we say, okay, his performance is very easily explained as far as he comes in fresh in the fourth quarter and kicks butt for 12 snaps. But his measurables are great. His movement looks great. He's a developmental player in the first place. He's far from topped out. So I would expect the Ravens to find a way to keep him in the fold. So, yeah, man, final thoughts on the O-line. I guess we'll start with Jordan this time and then go to Gabe.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're just going to have to see it to believe it kind of thing. I have faith that there's enough talent from these guys, and that we haven't seen the scheme, and we haven't seen what they're trying to do, and that we've got the thing I care the most about from this offensive line is, do we have five guys that can go into empty and protect Lamar long enough to make impact plays? Because if this offense can go back to what we did in empty in 2019, this offense is unstoppable. If the offense looks like it did last year out of empty, then this offense is going to have trouble in those moments. But so to me, that all comes down to joint gel protection of how they're going to protect Lamar and whether or not those individuals are ready to step up in those spots.
Yeah, I'll just go back to one of the things you said, Jason, about the pooling. And I think you're spot on about Powers. It's definitely not something that he excels in. He's not mobile, and I would say that Tyree Phillips actually can pull very well. I think he can. He does have that mobility. He can get to the second level, and he has good size. So I think that might give him a leg up, as Jordan was alluding to. So if that's something that they're really looking for out of that position, he would be my kind of number one candidate. Um, I do wonder though if maybe you can kind of change the directionality of your running game. Maybe you can use Kevin Zeitler as your primary puller out of the right guard position and kind of change things up a little bit. Um,
Sure.
I know it's a big change. You don't have Orlando Brown there that you're kind of run behind on the right tackle anymore. So maybe all those kind of gap power plays to the right side might start going to the other way, and you have more confidence in Zeitler as that pulling guard. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's a great point. So I would say to start the season, you probably don't want to. I mean, Greg Roman has a huge playbook, running playbook. I mean, that he wants to use any run at any time. So I'm not sure he would limit himself. But yeah, Gabe, I don't have any questions that Roman's got some plays where he can hide Powers' mobility, lateral mobility. I think Powers has shown he can climb to the second level, but getting up off the snap, going this way, finding an open man, it's harder than it sounds. There's a lot more that goes into it than measurables. It's a feel thing, it's an instinct thing, your eyes, all of that. And Powers just kind of looked very uncomfortable to me moving. So that was my thoughts on that. So wait a minute, I got the kicker before I got to the offensive line. So did I think I'm done with I think we did it. I think we did it.
Well, I think the coaching is also worth pointing out here too, Jason. We have not gotten a chance. I mean, the Ravens have been. There is not a more vanilla approach to the preseason that a team could take, right? One, because we just didn't see a lot of starters in preseason week 1, if any, right, across the board. We saw a very limited amount in preseason week 2. I think we're going to see a limited amount in week 3, so we're not going to see anything from those guys. What are these guys cooking up, right? Because I think there are a lot of questions about, one, how we want to scheme from what we have on this offensive line. Do we want to be pulling from Zeitler? Do they want to be running counter bash? Are they showing counter bash in the preseason because they're not going to run counter bash when we get to the regular season and teams are going to prep for it and we're not going to break that out? I think there's a real opportunity for Greg Roman and company to be really creative and really prove a lot of the doubters wrong. I think there's also a ton of downside in the other direction where they say, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing because we think it works. And they just do a couple nuanced things and it all comes out the same. And there's heavy criticism as a result of that, especially in big games. I mentioned the Kansas City game. That game is the Ravens have come out flat from a play calling and performance perspective against Kansas City. I can't tell you how many times. That game is 100% circled for me on the coaches. Get these guys ready, get them prepared, have scheme ready to go, and let's give them an actual game for one of these moments. And so I think I'm very confident in these guys. I think that the guys that we added, Williams and the other coaches escaping my mind.
T. Martin.
I think I think that they can bring really interesting concepts and really fix a lot of the things that aren't working with this offense. But we saw none of that in the preseason, and I think that's a big thing for us to keep an eye on as we get into week 1.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'll kind of touch on the other elephant in the room. And there's been a lot of discussion about Lamar Jackson, and not so much just Lamar Jackson, but the passing offense of the Ravens. And can the Ravens win just being this run-centric team? And, Jason, we've talked about it in the past. Jordan, we talked about it too. I think we both have some issues with the way the play calling has been done over the past couple of years, the sequencing of plays, the very kind of constant running on first down. It's something that can work, obviously, in certain situations, but it makes you predictable. And I think that, this might be an opportunity, this season might be an opportunity for the Ravens to break out of that mold, kind of be a little bit more flexible in how they do things. You can scheme up a little bit more against your opponents, kind of look at their weaknesses and figure out how you can attack them. You talked a lot about KC, Jordan, and it's for good reason. They're the best team in the AFC, I think. I mean, I love the Ravens, but KC's been there 2 years in a row in the Super Bowl, so you can't take that away from them. How can the Ravens beat them? They've put plays and drives against the Kansas City Chiefs, where they've looked like they're playing against like a varsity versus a junior varsity team, but they can't do it consistently. So how can you go against this Kansas City team that has a lot of weaknesses on their defense? How can you exploit them? You got to figure those things out, and that's what I think I'm looking for in the Ravens this coming season. Look at that roster and say, how can we attack them with what we have? Maybe it's using a more spread offense, using the passing game to open up the run game. That's what I've kind of been like wanting to see from this attack, and maybe we'll see it this year. I think that there are the weapons out there on the offense that you can do that now. You don't have to be this ground and pound and then try and take some shots on play action. I think you can do it the other way around, and you can make it work against a lot of teams in the NFL.
There's just so much good stuff in there. This was a real look inside the situation room for you guys. This is the kind of stuff that they could take and really expand on and do that. So for this offensive segment of our show, guys, I'm going to do another show on the defense just to make sure we keep the videos nice and manageable. But, man, there's so many good points. The first thing is, it seems like Kansas City's offense and Andy Reid outcoaches a ton of teams. And we see it on the defensive side here with Wink throwing things at teams that they can't handle. But, man, Andy Reid seems to have a play for every situation, for every defense, just a tremendous feel for the game. So this is a Ravens show, not a Chiefs show. But, if we're going to get over Kansas City, over the hump, the coaches have to show up. I'm with Jordan on that. That's a 100%. Put it on the coach's shoulders. And then the frustrating part to me, Gabe, about the offense is we've seen Roman set up plays beautifully, wide open plays, and then there's just this certain situational bang your head against the wall theory stubbornness about him that really frustrates the heck out of me. Now, as it concerns with the preseason play calling, it doesn't change my opinion of Roman one bit. I mean, we've talked about how the offensive lines have been in shambles. You got a backup quarterback. You've had, you basically have to protect Tyler Huntley now at this point because you don't have a third quarterback. Kenji Barr didn't even know the playbook, supposedly, allegedly, in my opinion, so I have heard, to the point where they couldn't even call a pass play or a handoff. It was like one handoff and then take a knee. So but my overall questions about Roman still lurk, you know what I mean? But I'm not going to read anything into the preseason with all this stuff. Like you said, I think that's just like overanalyzing it. You know what I mean? It could be outthinking ourselves. Let's just realize that Greg Roman has a long track history. We're just hoping that Coach Williams and Coach Martin can help here, and that we can change our philosophy a little bit. But guys, I wanted to get your parting words here on the offensive show before we switch over to the defensive show. Gabe, give me some. You're a numbers guy. Give me some over-unders, some expectations, any kind of like numbers that you want to touch on, and take your time to do so, Gabe.
Yeah, let me start with Lamar Jackson because I think that's kind of the number one kind of starting point when you have to talk about the Ravens offense. He had obviously an amazing season 2 years ago, MVP caliber, one of the best record-setting seasons we've ever seen out of a quarterback. And I think what I would want to see from him is a little bit more passing. Some of those attempts, some of those designed rushes, maybe some of the scrambles turned into keeping your eyes downfield and finding the open receiver. Whether that's Sammy Watkins, now you have someone who can uncover down the field. Whether it's Marquise Brown getting deep. We saw that in that fourth down play against the Browns, and he got behind a defender. Jackson got open with his feet, and he was able to loft the ball to Hollywood for that touchdown. I think we want to see more of that instead of maybe putting Jackson at risk in terms of his running. So that's one thing I would like to see. Maybe take 30 rushes and turn them into pass attempts. I think overall his numbers can kind of creep up to, the 3,500 range in terms of total yards and, 30 plus touchdowns. I think he's pretty solid in the 65% completion range. He's going to have a great year. I have no doubt. And then in terms of the receivers, I think it is interesting to see how this kind of wide receiver room is going to shake out. I agree with Jordan. I think Hollywood is going to be the one who's going to be the leading receiver. He might have 1,000-yard year this year. It won't surprise me at all. Probably a lot more explosive plays than maybe we've seen in the past. Not that he hasn't had them, but I think he's had to do more than that in the past. I think he can be used a little bit more as kind of that deep threat that he's really built to be. I think Bateman is going to have kind of kind of a slow start. He might not even be active in the first couple weeks, kind of getting those practice reps in. But I could see him getting 60, 70 targets this year. Kind of filling into that void that we've seen kind of like a Boykin Snead combined role, where you get like a lot of those like intermediate targets, some of those third down targets, maybe have some plays like scripted for him. Watkins is someone who's really interesting too, because he's just an unknown quantity. I think he's been kind of up and down in the past couple of years, and I'm excited to see what he can do this offense. If something happens to one of the other receivers, I could actually see him having a really good year, but I just don't see the targets coming in a huge way right away. And then one other guy I want to talk about is James Prochet. We touched on him a little bit. I think he could really come in and be kind of one of those unheralded guys. He's not going to get a ton of targets, maybe 40, 50 targets, but he's going to be a chain mover. I think he's going to be an important kind of third down option opposite of Mark Andrews, as someone you can rely on to get open on a short like 3rd and 5 jerk route, that kind of thing. So I'm excited about these guys. I think it's going to be a year where the offense looks a lot more like it did in 2019 than it did in 2020. And as I think one thing we talked about earlier about was the offensive line. It has to come together. It has to be better than it was last year. I think it will be, and I think that's going to be the foundational piece for why this offense is better.
Thank you, Gabe. I really appreciate it. All great thoughts. Jordan, go ahead. Same thing. Take your time and wrap it up, man.
Yeah, I mean, a couple numbers that I'd throw out there. I think the Ravens, depending on what happens in terms of the running game and the offensive line, legitimately have, if they truly go to a 2-back running back set, have a chance to have 3 guys rush for 1,000 yards on the year. I know that seems completely crazy, but it's not that far. If you look at the numbers, it's actually not that crazy. Dobbins had 800 yards last year. Edwards had nearly 750 yards last year. You throw in another week on top of that this year, right? Because we get that 17th week of the season. And you had 75 carries from Mark Ingram that are going kind of back into the system for them to be able to spread around. To me, that's legitimate 3,000-yard running, like 1,000-yard rushing guys that you have on your roster. That's just an incredible thing to think about. A couple other numbers that jumped out at me from last year was that Marquise Brown did lead the Ravens in targets with 100 targets. He led the Ravens in touchdowns with 8 touchdowns, over 7 to Andrews. I know Andrews missed a couple games. I think Andrews is always going to miss a couple games. He's one of those guys that seems to get banged up a little bit during the season. So I really do think Hollywood is going to be a big guy. But on the season, I also think that, 30, 40 targets when you're talking about some of these other receivers, I think a surprising number is that Devin Duvernay last year had 26 targets, which if you kind of consider that he wasn't really involved at all for the first few weeks, that's kind of a 30, 40 target pace, and he had kind of no impact at all whatsoever. And Boykin had like 35 targets on the year last year, something ridiculously low.
It was 20. So there are 22 catches, including playoffs. So, yeah, Jordan, it had to have been around there if you take a 60% catch rate. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Ultimately, the key, and Gabe and I have talked about this, I think the Ravens are going to score more than 550 points this year. We're talking about over-unders, because you get that 17th week, so you're going to get that extra surge in points. But where it really comes down to is converting basically 2 or 3 more first downs per game. Because the Ravens' ability to extend drives and to really make teams pay once those drives do get over that 5, 6, 7 play call. And I think that's where Greg Roman is at his strength, right? Once he has set you up and you are 6 or 7 plays deep into a drive, that's where he really can make teams pay. So if Coach Williams and Coach Martin can help us convert 3 or 4 more first downs over the course of any game, I think that puts this offense in unstoppable territory. I don't know that we'll get there. For a lot of the reasons that we talked about, where we might not have confidence in certain things, but it almost seems like this team, for the first time ever, the Ravens have as complete of an offense as a team could ask for in the salary cap era. And the expectations should be as high accordingly for what they should produce.
Yeah, and my final thoughts are the 3,000-yard rushers does sound crazy, but man, it is kind of close because those Ingram carries are gone. And then if you look at just if the situation breaks right, I mean, it would have to break right. Somebody could have 1,100 and somebody could have 950. So it would have to be, but it's having 3,000 rushing yards. I mean, that's kind of where we've been. So, yeah, it's not that far-fetched, and I think, of course, it would be historical. And then I just wanted to lastly echo you guys' thoughts on Hollywood Brown. I haven't talked about him, I don't think. But all the complementary pieces, whether Bateman's healthy now, no matter how healthy Sammy is, the emergence of Prochet carving out a role. We see Tylan Wallace doing a little bit on the right sideline, which could free Hollywood up. All the signs are pointing to the arrow pointing up for Hollywood Brown. And if I was a betting man, I'd say, he's going to top 1,000 yards this year. Easily. I'd say maybe he gets 100 targets, but instead of if you have the numbers up there, Jordan, I think it was like 58 catches. I could see him getting close to that 70 catch mark, on 100 plus targets and going way over 1,000 yards. So, guys, I really appreciate your time for the offensive show. Hopefully, we can do the defensive show if we have time. But I just wanted to say thank you to my football family and those of you who are still watching. Guys, love y'all. Can you say goodbye to the people for me, all right?
Thanks for having us, Jason. Appreciate it. You guys can check us out on Twitter at Raven Sit Room.
Yeah, and I'm at Gabe Fergie. It's been a lot of fun, Jason. Can't wait to have the defensive side of the ball conversation.
All right, awesome, man. I'll take that as a yes. We'll see you guys later. Thank you.